Good afternoon, everyone. We're just waiting on one more of our panelists. If I can ask you, it's a fairly intimate group, so if you can come closer, that would be quite nice. Those down at the end.
Martin can stay there.
If you could just join us closer up to the front. Thanks. Okay, Mehmet. Mehmet. Let's call Mehmet. Roger, it's
I'd like to say thanks that I met you. Please do, yes. And please thank all what he's doing with Christine to also help first. It's really good.
Can't hear me. Okay, we're about to begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our online participants as well. Welcome to Workshop 72, Building Technical Communities in Developing Regions. My name is Bevel Wooding. I am from Packet Clearinghouse, and I'm also one of the co-founders of the Caribbean Network Operators Group. With me on this panel, Nishal, also from Packet Clearinghouse, Mehmet, Microsoft, Martin from Nanog, and Alejandro from LACNIC. Did I get that right? No. And then they will each introduce themselves. But this is going to be a fairly dynamic and interactive discussion. It's the first time that we're having this session, and the idea was to start discussing around some of the experiences and lessons learned in setting up technical communities around the world. As most of you would know, one of the underlayers of the internet development and growth is, in fact, the establishment of healthy, robust technical communities. And for a lot of regions, getting such communities up and running has been somewhat of a challenge, but it remains an essential part of keeping a healthy, stable internet. And so we wanted to use this opportunity, looking at the explosive growth in the developing regions in particular, to discuss around the issue of technical communities. What are they? What do they do? What are the benefits? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the opportunities that exist? And I think the panelists here present us with a breadth of experience that allows us to have that discussion. We will have a lot of time for interaction as well, and of course you're free to engage us as we present. There are no presentations or slides in this session, just sharing from experience and sharing from our perspectives on the role that technical communities play. So, without further ado, I will have each of the panelists give their views, say who they are, where they're from, what kind of role they've played in technical communities in their regions, and we will take the discussion forward from there, starting with Nishal.
Thanks, Bevel, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nishal Gobadan. I'm an internet analyst at Packet Clearinghouse. Relatively new to that job, but before that, I worked heavily at Afrinic, the regional internet registry for Africa. I had various technical jobs there, and prior to that, at a service provider in South Africa. So Bevel asked me to talk today about some of my experiences, particularly relating to the communities in the African region. And that would relate really to AFNOG, which is the African Network Operators Group, and the very recent SAFNOG, which is the Southern African Network Operators Group that we formed. We had our first meeting March, April this year, I forget exactly. So, you know, for a key part of us, at least the developing part that is Africa, I think a word that a lot of you would have heard coming from probably last year's IGF, a new word that's going around a lot, is trust. Yeah, I know when I did the first few IGFs back 2007, 2009, it was obviously a theme, but not as prevalent. And I think after some of the experiences that have happened, that word you get to hear a lot more these days. And especially in the kind of environment that we have in Africa, where you have a very personal, very want to know and understand how somebody is doing things. Trust plays an enormous part in, I should say, developing and building not just the human network, but the network that we've come to rely on, the network that we call the internet. So when we talk about how is it that I do something, yes, there's a technical book for this. There's an RFC, there's a guide, there's an O'Reilly manual or something that you would expect to see. But a very important, a very personal part of that experience has come out of the, how have you done this in your environment? How can you contextualize what you have done in your environment that is not dissimilar from mine? How do I get that done? And the best way of doing that is obviously through some sort of closed group, some sort of, sorry, I shouldn't say closed group, some sort of open group, but a group that can share in your idiosyncratic problems, i.e. a small regional technical group. So, you know, this has been incredibly important to us. I know, for example, speaking with the context of an exchange point operator I had, we started the Johannesburg Exchange Point in 1996. That's a long time ago, at least in internet years. That's too many for me to remember. And the element, the key element, the single key element that led to the build of the exchange point at that time was trust. Was getting the internet service providers to understand that you know, there's value in doing this. There's obviously economic value, there's technical value, but also the how do I do this? Building from the small group that we had, obviously it's a very simple it was a very simple process for us. It was getting everybody in a room, kind of similar to this, listening to their problems, understanding what it is that they have to do, trying to work with the team to resolve the issues that they've had, and then growing that from running the small internet exchange point, which was Jinx, to, well, involving more and more people from the region. At that time we called it ZANOG, which was the loose for the South African Network Operators Group, and it's changed over the years. It's now called something entirely different. But the idea of getting people in, getting them to solve the problem localized to their environment, that was obviously something that was really important to us. And again, it had to be a solution, at least for us, it had to be a solution that came from within ourselves, within the region. It could not be something that was pushed and enforced to us. So without hogging all my time, because I know Bevel wants this to be a very interactive session, I'm going to say, I'd like to start off with saying the key thing for us is trust.
Hi, my name is Mehmet Aksin. I'm actually from Turkey. I was born 2 blocks up from the location we are in, so I'm home. I currently live in Redmond, Washington, headquarters of Microsoft. My interaction to creating communities for technical engineers, administrators, system administrators, is mainly based on a startup idea of Turkey. We had this idea in 2001, about keeping the local traffic local here, and we wanted to start up an exchange point. We find out that actually it was quite impossible, because at that time there was a monopoly. Well, there's still kind of monopoly here, but there was a big monopoly and government-owned infrastructure. So what we did instead, well, if we can't connect the networks to each other, why don't we get together and share our ideas and see what other things we can do. I used to work for a university network as a network engineer at that time. So we basically start getting together. Unlike like Nanogs or other events where beer is the main theme, our main theme was hookah, the shisha, nargile. So we would go and smoke and then chat and share about ideas, what we can do. So when I moved out of Turkey, that kind of have died and didn't really, have an organized way of repeating meetings. However, several years back, about 6 years ago, we bring the idea of TR-NOG back. So TR-NOG is today actually an active organization that you can send emails. It does have some local small meetups, and as well as annual or biannual meetings, I should say, where we meet and discuss ideas. And we do have some upcoming events that we are going to announce, where we are especially targeting on the big goal that we want to finally deliver after 14 years, which is an exchange point. It's sad that Turkey does not really have an internet exchange point as you know it. So stepping back, some of the challenges we had while we were working on this idea of operators is the cultural challenge. Turkish people tends to not trust other Turkish people. I'm going to say this because I can't totally say this, I'm Turkish. So it's interesting, because it seems like it's other way around when they're dealing with people outside of Turkey. But when they are dealing with somebody in Turkey, the main idea is, okay, this guy is so nice to me, he can't be so nice, he can't be really this helpful, nobody is, he must want something from me. Because of that, we have struggled kicking this idea and creating and sharing environment for TR-NOG especially. The website is www.trnog.org, just for those who might be interested in joining. The language is English and Turkish and Kurdish, whatever language you want to send. So one of the main challenge then was, how do we start this discussion? So we start sending out emails, we start talking about different subjects, but at some point some events, starting a fiber cut, several fiber cuts which were between Turkey and Cyprus, we noticed that this emailing list did not have any traffic on it, but it had so many moderators, so many people actually following it. The moment someone in Cyprus emailed the list saying, we are having some difficulties connecting back to Turkey, and we have some fiber outage, someone from Turk Telecom replied immediately. And this was the moment, this was the moment of truth for this Turkish network operators group, where things started happening. The next thing we know, and like, oh, I have this problem with some Twitter, my Twitter is not working, or this service is not working. People started using this list, including YouTube, many others who were blocked due to several reasons. People started discussing that, but very technically, and I really didn't even ever have to, moderate or do anything to change it, because all people really cared was how can we solve this problem. We do have some external people that we invited to the list, and those people are basically sharing their experience of sending out some notifications, routing tables, etc., and changes. And also it's a good place to discuss, but right now our biggest challenge is how do we kickstart this again with more intense face-to-face physical connections and meetings.
Hi everyone, my name is Maarten van Horenbeek and I'm the current president of the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. Now, FIRST is a little bit of an odd technical community, and it's a little bit different than the other technical communities you'll hear about today. And the two main reasons why we're slightly different is because we're a technical community, mostly of organizations that work on security and incident response issues. And second, we're global, so we're not regional, we're not local. We aim to combine as many organizations and people across the world. Now, FIRST came to be back in 1989, way before I actually was involved in the organization. And it came to be after the first major internet worm struck. And several organizations saw a need to be able to call upon other peer organizations whenever they had a security incident that affected more than one of them. And that root of where the organization came from has really influenced some of the things that we value a lot. Nishal mentioned earlier that trust is a major thing in technical community. And that's something that we see in FIRST every day. And in fact, FIRST membership is pretty much built on it. So the way that the organization actually works is that we permit members based on vetting by other organizations that are already a member. So in order to become a part of the FIRST technical community, an organization needs to build out or have an incident response capability and actually have that capability vetted by at least 2 other members that are willing to attest this organization is at a level where they make sense to be a partner of ours in this wider incident response community. And today, FIRST combines over 200 organizations from 66 countries across the world. And really our philosophy there is that we are trying to make sure that when one member of FIRST has a security incident and they need to be able to reach out to another organization from where the attack may be originating, for instance, due to a compromised host on their network, that they can find the right people within FIRST to actually reach out and make that happen. Now, trust isn't just made by vetting an organization. In fact, if you look at those 200 plus organizations that are members of FIRST today, many of them may not know the other team before it actually joins the organization. So what we really need to do on a daily basis is create opportunities for our members to get to know each other, to trust each other, and even to sometimes involve people from outside of the direct FIRST community. And the main way that we do that is by organizing events. We have an annual incident response conference which travels across the world to make sure that there can be local participation from different regions. And we also do a number of smaller events which we call symposia and technical colloquia, which are actually organized by our members, and we assist them in setting that up so that they can invite local participants and actually introduce them into the community. In addition, FIRST also enables our members to create standards together. And one of the ways that we have found is that one of the best ways for 2 engineering organizations to start trusting each other is to actually write code together or to work together on a common standard that they can use to afterwards deal with a security incident. So we actually fund our teams internally to create standards, create efforts that will help the community as a whole. And if they need to, we also permit them to, of course, involve people from outside of the direct FIRST membership and the direct FIRST community. And really, to summarize, what we try to do in FIRST is we try to create opportunities for our members to deal better with security incidents by using the power of having all of those organizations in one larger group where they can work together, they can exchange experiences, and where they can just do more than they would be able to do by themselves.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Alejandro Acosta. I work for LACNIC as engineer for innovation and development. And well, I'm going to talk a little bit more or less what we do in our events. And specifically, an upcoming event that we're going to have in Curaçao, in the Caribbean, and how we are building this event, and of course, all of you can attend to it in person or remotely. Basically, what we did, we divided the event of course, in 5 days. And during the first day, what we do is to talk general stuff, like updates, what have been doing in LACNIC, in Caribenoc, in CARICOM, and things on the Caribbean. We are going to talk about our PDP, the policy development process, and we invite the people to participate in the policy development process because, of course, we believe in participation. And we explain to them that they can participate, they can talk, they can complain, they can disagree in a certain policy, and they can raise their hand and express any suggestion that can be. Thank you so much. So they can change, they can rephrase the policy if they believe it is necessary. We're going to talk also about IXPs, why they are so important. Most of the traffic in the Caribbean and in Latin America go to the United States and then go back to Latin America again. And we explain that, of course, it is not good. It can be much better. If we keep the traffic locally, they can improve the performance for the end user. They can also save money and that kind of things. We also are going to talk about CDNs, how they are built, how they can be set up, and try to bring content to Latin American and to the Caribbean. One more time, we explain why that kind of things are important. We have something very interesting in this event. We're going to talk about cloud computing, cloud data centers in the cloud, and trying to bring, one more time, cloud computing to the Caribbean and to Latin American. We are going to talk a lot about IPv6. For LACNIC, it is very important, the IPv6 deployment in the region, and we're trying to push one more time, the people, the companies, and of course everyone, to implement the IPv6. We have special sessions like some kind of training for IPv6, and we're going to talk on IPv6 in the enterprise. So trying to push and encourage the companies to implement the IPv6 about this. And we're going to talk also about SDN, about this software-defined network, or networking, which is a topic that is like a hot stuff, and we believe it is important. We have also a full day that we are going to cover security in data centers, in servers, spam, and that kind of things, which also we believe are very important. And well, that's all. If you have any question, please feel free. Thank you.
Thanks, Alejandro. I want to give just a quick account of some of the stuff that has been taking place in the Caribbean to give some further context. Everyone would have mentioned issues of trust, the importance of collaboration, and the value of building relationships. When we started the Caribbean Network Operators Group in the Caribbean, the context was this. We were looking to encourage countries to establish internet exchange points. And we realized very quickly that for most of the technical community, which was not an established community, most of those in the technical sector, the only information they had regarding some of the important issues, the value of IXPs, the requirement to transition from IPv4 to IPv6, the need to build networks in a particular way to encourage growth in the wider market. For most of the engineers and the technically minded, their information came only from their employers. And so when we started to talk about the importance of exchange points, the pushback that we got was, well, these things are not necessary. We have enough IPv4. There is not sufficient traffic to exchange in the region. There is no need for exchange points. And we realized very quickly that unless and until a separate independent forum was created to have unbiased conversations around some of the developments taking place in the wider internet community, that these guys would remain essentially in a bubble shaped for them by their companies. and understand this about the topography of the region. Those companies were largely monopoly type or duopoly type telecom service providers with no real interest in changing the status quo. So very quickly we had to bring attention to the wider context of what was happening in the internet, what other groups and organizations were doing, what kinds of work, why collaboration between competitors was not a bad thing, and how information could be shared. And this might seem to be basic or fundamental conversations, but they were very, very important to breaking that initial mindset that said we do not and cannot and will not collaborate on matters relating to network development, cybersecurity, you name it. And so step one was to create an understanding of the context in which the world, and the world not just of technology or the internet, the world was moving, and to create a rallying point. For us, the rallying point was internet exchange points. And we positioned internet exchange points as the foundation for the internet economy, and used that as the doorway into why we need to have technical communities at both the regional level and robust technical communities at the national level. And that was the seed for what then became CARIBNOG, or the Caribbean Network Operators Group. It also became the platform upon which the operators got introduced to organizations like LACNIC, like ARIN, like ISOC, ICANN, and the other internet organizations. Before that, there was very little reason for them to venture outside of their corporate walls and outside of corporate policy. Now, this is 5 years on, we have a more aware technical community. We still don't have perfect collaboration, but there certainly are now a number of projects around which a broad, region-wide set of activity can now take place. So our approach to building relationship and establishing trust is somewhat different from, for example, what takes place in NANOG, the North American group, where, as Mehmet said, it's all about beer and those kinds of functions. For us, it's about finding points of common opportunity where the only way things can move forward is if they move forward through collaboration. And the events that we have 2 regional events and a number of national level events. The events take place around those topics that are important to the operators. Things that they can't find out if they only went on corporate training. What's the state of cybersecurity globally? What is the nature of the IPv4, IPv6 situation? How does it apply back at networks where it is said the growth will take place at so slow a rate that you'll never need IPv6 anytime soon? How do you prepare for an inevitable future? And those are the kinds of conversations the CARIBNOG meetings have taken on. And I think inside of that, one of the principles that we established was we have to both reach into the countries, reach into the organizations, and at the same time reach out to multinational organizations, reach out to other like-minded bodies that are interested in technical community development. One of the things that I heard very early on in the development of CARIBNOG was nobody shares anything for nothing. And there was great suspicion around why would we just want to have training for training's sake, and why would we just want to provide free access to information that up to that point was considered trade secrets and intelligence that had to remain inside of company walls. And it's been interesting to see how that perspective or that mindset has been broken as more visible benefits of collaboration and sharing become manifest. One of the biggest ways in which that collaboration has become manifest is in the area of cybersecurity. There have been a number of attacks in the Caribbean region, and the only way that they could be treated with is by reaching out to other organizations for support, particularly when the attacks originate outside, as most of them do, outside of the region. And so we have used the bad situation of high levels of cybersecurity breaches to create a good scenario where more people are encouraged to share and more people are encouraged to trade information and knowledge for the greater good. I want to throw out some questions, a couple questions to the panelists in terms of, and we have different kinds of technical communities here. What were some of the biggest obstacles to the establishment of the community and to its growth in your experience? And anyone can start it off.
Okay, so I spoke a bit about trust, and I was talking more about themes and things other than things we did. If you want to know stuff that we've done, I can answer that off menu. I think one of the biggest problems was getting people interested in this, because let's be honest, right? Everybody has 2.5 jobs at least. Everybody's busy. Everybody at that stage back in the early 90s was busy doing a lot of things. So it was trying to get people to understand that there's an incredible amount of value in interacting with the person sitting next to you, a competitor in most cases, to try to get this information out of them. So it was time. Although I might have trusted Mehmet, I might have liked him, I kind of know what he does. It was time. In some cases, and this is speaking outside of my context, at least outside the South African context, but especially in other parts of the African region, there is very much an element of you will not interact with the person sitting next to you. So on one hand, we have one part of the region saying, yes, we kind of trust and we kind of want to work with each other. On the other hand, we have a different part of the community that says we will absolutely not exchange information with competitors. And I mean, I think you've heard that already coming out of Mehmet. It's not something that is unique to Turkey, certainly. It's something that's unique to, well, something that's common to a lot of countries that we do. So yeah, I think the biggest issue, again, without hogging the mic, is going to be time and getting people to see and understand that this is something that they're going to do. And there was a great article, a great picture I saw yesterday. It was a little cartoon of these two guys that's pushing a wagon that's got square wheels, and the caption says "busy, busy," and behind them there was a guy with a wheel, the way we know it, a proper round wheel, and they were telling him, "Go away, we're too busy to deal with this right now." So it's that ability to stop, take stock of what you're doing, step back and say what's being introduced, and how can we analyze what's being introduced and put this into our working systems to see if it's going to enable us to move more effectively.
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement actually on building trust. And that really, when I think of two challenges that we've had in building the technical community that first is today, I see one very theoretical, sensitive one, which is the trust issue, and one very practical one. But maybe to tell you a little bit more about how we try to address the trust issue. So I mentioned earlier that we have a vetting process for new teams that actually enter the organization. Now, even with that vetting, there's absolutely no chance that 200 plus organizations are going to want to share information with 200 plus organizations that they do not know. So that simply doesn't work. So instead, and I'm going to use a bit of a policy term here, confidence building measures. In many ways, that's actually what, as engineers, we do as well. We do little things to get to a point where we feel comfortable doing the bigger things. So we write a little bit of code together, we figure out what type of standards that we need to exchange the information, and once we build those standards, we know the people well enough that we can really make a determination. Does it make sense to share with these people, or does it not make sense? So that's one way of tackling that particular problem. And really, you don't fix trust with an NDA. You fix trust with working together and achieving on the expectations that you have of the other person. And then moving away from that more sensitive or personable issue to something more practical. As an organization, we organize a major conference, which we take to various places across the world. And unfortunately, with a larger event comes a certain cost. So as an organization, we do charge entry fees into, for instance, the conference. And that makes it really troublesome to really connect across the world, because what is completely acceptable as a fee to one organization is going to be completely unacceptable to another one. So ways that we've worked to address that is by making sure that we also have smaller events where the cost is much, much lower, and which we can essentially do for much less money or even completely free for attendees. And those events are much more popular in certain places where otherwise the fee would actually be a major blocker for participating. And second, as an organization, we also decided that it's really important for us that we have participation across the world and that we have participation from many different communities. And so in order to help push that, we also initiated a fellowship program where we're actually funding CSIR teams from countries which are lower on the development ranking, so that they can actually participate in FIRST without having to bear the full expense of, for instance, the membership membership cost, attendance to the conference, and so on. We think that's important because, especially in security, a lot of problems can happen anywhere in the world, and it's important both for those teams to be able to get access to the community that we have and the tools that we make available, and that's equally important as it is for the rest of the world to be able to reach out to those communities. For instance, one particular software vulnerability which was found in a worm called Duku was originally seen initially in Sudan. And so it's very important that those regions also have access to the same community. And that's why we're implementing those measures to make sure that they can actually participate as well.
Thanks, Martin. That actually brings up an important priority inside of any technical community, and that is balancing national priorities versus regional priorities. Anyone wants to share on how that has played out in your region or territory? For example, if I look at the Caribbean, you have countries that are very much focused on security, cybersecurity. And the wider issues around network stability, expansion, preparation for growth may not be today's priority because of limited resource, lack of knowledge, or what have you. And so when the regional event takes place and it is looking at a spectrum of activity, they're saying, well, we're just interested in this one thing right now, which is, of course, not the best way to approach any kind of development in the long term. How do you, or how have you, for example, in LACNIC, addressed that issue of national priorities versus regional?
Wow, a tough question. Well, you know, it sounds like a problem like the egg and the chicken, because of course you need to pay attention first. Well, what I see, you need to pay attention with what you have now. So you should not grow, you should not expand your network if maybe you have a lot of security issues, if you have a lot of problems, maybe it is unstable network. So from my point of view, you should fix the problem now, and then you should expand. You should not be expanding the network, because you should, in that case, you will be generating more problems than solutions. And it's not, from my point of view, it does not make sense. And well, and from LACNIC, we pay attention to all of that, basically, and we try to see a lot, very close to the countries, and try to see where we can help. For example, now that we're talking a lot about IXPs, for example, we have been doing like trainings for RPKI in order to assure the routing table. And that kind of things are very important in IXPs, because you should try to prevent network hijacking. And also we're trying to push like DNS secure standards, like talking to different and big providers to country code top level domains in order to implement DNSSEC in the registries. And well, that's all.
So I think one of the reasons when you have something to add? Go ahead.
Hello, Ernesto Majo from LACNIC. Something to add to the comment from Alejandro. LACNIC during the last years was concentrated in the regional process, so we have several forums like network security, IPv6 forum, and interconnection also. These are regional forums. So when we start, when each one of them, the process started in the community, because some people from the community raise the need to create a separate, an independent space to exchange information about some issue like IPv6 or security incidents. Network security, sorry. This is one way, and we gave support to these forums in different ways, like hosting the mailing list, giving some funds for travels for the chairs of these forums, And we also help in the election of the chairs in the process. The communities who drives the process, we just support the community on this activity. This is one way. The other way is like in like CSERT, we create a forum also for CSERT groups, and this is different because the kind of work is different, and the needs of this kind of forum is different. This is a closed forum. It's not open for all. It's open for people who works in CSERT. So it's different, and also now we are, for example, they don't have a chair, but we are organizing regular conference and discussion about different issues. We organize in every LACNIC meeting a side event, a small event with for CSERTs. And but in the last 2 years, we are seeing that the national communities are increasing, and they now have need to create a local, a national forums like NOGS. For example, I think Chile is growing, and Argentina also. These forums have a strong support from internet society also, not only by LACNIC, or mainly for internet society. Also, we support them as Alejandro said, collaborating with the ISPs, trying to enhance their abilities to provide a more stable network.
Hello, Narani Nimpuna from NetNode. I thought, because there were some questions about just the community building part, I thought I would throw in a few points there. So I work for NetNode. We're an internet exchange point. We also run one of the 13 root servers. But I thought I'll speak from the perspective of kind of someone who's been in various communities, technical communities around the world. And I mean, I think the starting point is simple in that the internet is unique in that it's the only place, or one of the few industries, where you really have to talk to each other to make things work, right? You have to exchange traffic, so you need to talk to your competitors, and there's a certain sort of amount of cooperation there, so that's a fairly good starting point. I think if there is an exchange point in your country or your region, that's a really good starting point as well, because it's a very natural center of gravity, because it's where the different operators interconnect. And I think just a few things that I've observed from various communities. So one is talk. So, you know, you need to convince people that there's a common interest here and that everyone actually benefits from that cooperation. So you kind of need to change the mindset of, you know, I don't want to share something with you because, you know, that's not in my interest, but actually that there's a common interest there. I think when building a community, you know, that a few things, lead by example. So by sharing your information, by giving tutorials, sharing your experience, other people will sort of be more open to do the same thing. The other thing is to find the key players in your community. There are always a few key players, people who have a lot of experience, people who are charismatic, or people who have a lot of connections. By getting them involved, you'll get others on board as well. And so what you want is you want to make sure that your community becomes a place of information and knowledge sharing. So it's sort of a natural place where people gather. I think, you know, you'll start small, and it will be a very small, you know, community to start with. And it doesn't mean you have to have, you know, big formal meetings. Like a good example is in New Zealand, the NZ there, they have Thursday curries. So people go out for curry on Thursdays. Sometimes they're 2 people, sometimes they're 30, sometimes they're more. So, you know, you can start on a small scale. Involve people, you know, think like program committees and various forms of associations means that people own the issues and they want to get involved. They kind of feel part of that community. And by having, technical presentations and other things, and by adding tutorials and workshops, it also becomes a way of getting new people into the community who want to learn from sort of the elders. And by doing that, you also have capacity building. Another very important factor, which I kind of see as like one constant factor in all of these technical communities I go to, beer. Whether or not you're a beer drinker, but have a social, it's actually really, really important to not only have these sort of sessions with tutorials and presentations. You need to make it a place where people can talk and in a relaxed way. So have a good social, it's actually key in the community building. And it's sort of the lubricant to build those social relationships, because unless you build those social relationships, the community won't sustain. And then try to sort of build a community feeling, by having sort of finding common sort of attributes, and even things like, having your Nanog t-shirt or those things makes people actually, it seems trivial, but it actually makes people feel part of that community. And then the last thing I think, and that's a challenge, is to find ways of getting new people and young people involved. And again, I think in New Zealand, the NZ there, they do it really well in that they consciously try to find places. They have very low-cost meetings at universities or other places so that they can get new young network engineers into the community. So just a few points of sharing my experience. Thanks.
We have a question from the remote participants.
Okay.
From Syed Iftikhar Shah. What are the recommendations for eGov Cloud? Is there a dedicated cloud or shared, particularly in terms of security and confidentiality?
I don't get the question. Could you repeat?
This is the question.
Could you please repeat the question?
Yes. What are the recommendations for eGov Cloud? Is there a dedicated cloud or shared, particularly in terms of security and confidentiality? Is that okay?
Yeah. We're just getting that translated. Yeah. Let's get some more feedback from the audience.
Yeah. I'm not going to answer the question. Just
thank you.
Yeah.
Question actually might belong to previous session where it was about the cloud, which has ended.
Could be.
Yeah. So my name is Adli from APNIC, and I'm just going to add maybe just 2 points with regards to building capabilities in communities in developing region. One is that now I think there's some in our region. I think one of the things that is quite obvious is that there's no question about the interest. Everybody's interested to get on board and to learn about the new technologies and get organized and things like that. But looking at the Asia Pacific region itself, outreach is challenging because of the physical discrepancies between one country and another, and certain countries are more advanced than another, and so on and so forth. So I find that one of the good working model is that to find a local partner who can help co-organize things, so that they can organize event, maybe and invite technical expertise if it's not available locally. And just and it's much cheaper than getting everyone fly somewhere to get education and things like that. So that has been working within APNIC, where local communities work with one another, and where there is no organizer or not enough people in one country, they would sync up with people in a neighboring country, like regional activity. So the NOGs and things like that have been very effective. But also still in doing that, there's only so much that you can do, in terms of frequency of events. So maybe once a year or twice a year. So another platform that we are experimenting with is the e-learning, making Wednesday an e-learning day. So we have topics lined up and so that wherever you are within that region, whether you're in +5 GMT or +12, right? There's always a tutorial or a workshop online every Wednesday, and so far I think this is well received, because then of course you cut down the need to have an event to address a group or to provide capacity development. And that's pretty much it that I would like to add.
Thank you for those comments. I think it is fairly important to acknowledge that e-learning is the key, because the way that the amount of new engineers coming on board and the way that we need to train them, the only way this can scale is that if we can make it available on demand and available remote. So next questions, Bill?
No,
sorry.
1 second. Yeah, first. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Alex Semnyaka, RAP Community, INOC Program Committee. We have INOC, it's a network operating group formed from operators from former Soviet Union space. And I just want to add one couple of ideas, actually. First of all, is it absolutely right that we need to support young engineers, and we are trying to do that. We have workshops for them before the beginning of the event. We have some sessions for them. Of course, we have a lot of talks for engineering community, but we want to participate in our activity also people who make decisions. Usually it's former engineers. They are from our audience, they are from our community, but it's not exactly engineering people right now. So we try to balance between pure engineering topics like IXPs, IPv6 of course, IPv6 implementation, IPv6 development and so on, and all other stuff like that, and some organizational topics. From, network neutrality, sorry, to some, IRI activities and so on. That allows first us bring to our event people, former engineers, but now they are high-level managers or C star or somebody like that. And it helps us to educate engineer people, give them an idea what all this organizational stuff is. That is also important, we think. And we try to balance those parts, those engineering topic and organizational topic for each event. And this balance is different for each event we have, actually. And for us, it's very important, a very important idea. I think that it may be interesting for other NOCs. Also, I would say that for our countries, it's very important to have support from local companies, of course. And usually, we have strong support from .ru in Russia, .ua in Ukraine, .az in Azerbaijan next week. So local TLD are helping our NOC a lot. So maybe it will be useful for somebody else.
It's feedback from Alejandro and then Bill.
Well, this is a small feedback regarding the two last comments. And probably this can be a good idea for many people. What we have been doing in LACNIC, and trying to elaborate more the comment from Ernesto Majo, what we did is we have several different forums, like he said, the security forum, of course the policy forum. We have one which is called the Latin American IPv6 forum, and the interconnection forum. And those forums are chaired by people from the community. And we invite many different other people to come to this forum, For example, what we call the keynotes. So we have keynotes which speak about several other experiences in probably in another part of the world. People, of course, from the region, and they share their experiences in those forums. And so the people learn a lot and share experiences. Also, the trust is increased because we're on site, in place, person to person. So that kind of things are, I believe, are very valuable. And probably some of you can copy those kind of successful ideas. Thank you.
Bill?
So I just wanted to pose a question to the panel. There's always this great desire for knowledge transfer and to help jumpstart technical communities in areas that don't yet have them. I'm wondering if you know of or can think of any examples in which a successful technical community was jump-started from the outside. That is, in which an organization was started without having as its seed one or more people within the region or within the community who had enough expertise and motivation to get it going themselves.
That's actually a really great question because it's very, very difficult to try and kickstart something like this. And I don't really have names of communities because I've seen something else develop, which to me is still a technical community. So one of the things that we try to do at first is we try to provide training classes related to incident response in regions where there aren't a lot of CSIRT teams in existence. And one of the things that we usually do is when we provide this type of class, we also make sure that we have a local partner that can help us make sure there is some follow-up. And sometimes that follow-up really is nothing more than a mailing list. So you provide the class, hopefully you can do a lot more follow-up with that local partner, but in certain cases you're limited to just having a mailing list where people can later converse. And by making sure that a couple of people from other communities can participate in that list and actually provide input and guidance when they are doing something, you can see that those lists sometimes turn into de facto technical communities. And they don't necessarily call themselves under a name. They might not call themselves a NOG, for instance, but they have a very similar function in a sense that they are a pool where individuals with a certain interest can come together, and more importantly, where young people that are really interested in that topic can find guidance and can find things that help motivate them. So I think that's one example of where you can see technical communities being kickstarted from the outside. That having been said, it will still then be up to those people to actually formalize it and turn it into a formal community that works together with other communities. So it's not really a concrete answer to your question. Just, I think it's a vision of what is possible and what does actually happen in the community at large.
Not the answer, Bill, but I want to make a general comment. The most important thing for those who are coming to these kind of events to collaborate is ROI, return of investment. They're investing a time, they're investing efforts, they're investing information. They want to see what they're getting back. So I think Nurani has put together like some amazing list of ideas which can make that return of investment really high for the amount of time and efforts that are spent. You know, I want to especially thank her for that, but ROI is a very important key for enabling participation.
Yeah, agreed. Well, we're at time now, so I just want to ask the panelists to give us some tweetable final comments, very brief.
I'm going to jump on the back of that and just add a quick comment as well. We heard something yesterday in one of the other panels that I want to quote, and I think it's key to what we were discussing now. The internet is built, not bought. So if you want to find a sustainable solution to what you're trying to do, you've got to have moist ground, you've got to have an environment that can enable that for you. And without a technical community to grow, without a community, I should say, to grow, not just a technical community, you've got no hope of trying to grow the internet, either the administrative part, the technical part, the governance part of it, in any part in your environment. Thanks.
That's not really tweetable. More than 140. So we will do something tweetable. Does it include from the previous event? Can we say anything from there? No. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for organizing this. My tweetable comment is, I am not an internet governance expert. I am an engineer, and after my first full IGF attendance, I'm proud of it.
Well, from my end, there's really not that much more to say, but one thing that I did see here at the IGF is that it's really important for those people that actually operate technical communities that we don't stick to the technical. It's really important that we involve other stakeholder groups, that we involve other communities that we work with and that use the things that the technical community is building, and that we find ways to actually use that energy and make bigger things happen. Technical communities are the root of a lot of things that happen on the internet, and that's very healthy, and it's a very, very good situation, but it will only grow stronger if we also involve some of these other communities in the discussions that we have and we widen them up a bit. And thanks for organizing the session. I think this was very useful, and I am actually walking away with a list myself of very interesting comments that came from the audience, so thank you.
Thank you so much. And well, I believe this is a terrific opportunity to share our concerns and to express what is going on in different parts of the world and technical problems basically in this moment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all panelists. I believe, and I think it's clear even from the feedback from everyone, that the technical communities represent the engine that keeps the internet alive and healthy. So the list that we got, thank you, Narani. Thank you for the questions and feedback. They all play up, they all show, or they all demonstrate that for all of the diversity that exists, there are some common principles and platforms that help define, shape, and maintain healthy technical communities. I think we'll do well to keep that in mind as we go on from here. I want to thank the panelists and you, the audience, for your participation. And for those online as well who are following us, thank you very much. I believe this is not going to be the last time that we have a session like this. It's very important for us to understand how the technical communities are evolving and the role that they're playing in the evolving internet. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Gordon Smith. We'll begin the panel on time. There is an empty chair next to me, and that's for Vint Cerf, who is here and we believe coming. But in respect to you all, I thought we should begin on time, and hopefully this won't involve too much going backwards and forwards. Let me first of all welcome you to this panel on fragmentation, and perhaps give you just a little bit of the background of some of the work that we have been doing. When I say we, I'm talking about the Center for International Governance Innovation, the only center, the only think tank in my understanding, my belief, that is focused on international governance innovation in a variety of sectors. So, thank you. We started this project, which has led to the creation of the Global Commission on Internet Governance, which is chaired by my colleague, the Foreign Minister of Sweden, previous Prime Minister, Carl Bildt. We are going to be having a meeting of the Commission in Seoul, Korea, in about 5 weeks, 6 weeks' time. And the main subject, the commissioners have already met once, the main subject they wanted to discuss at this meeting is that of fragmentation. So it's interesting to me, it's very interesting that is where they really wanted to start. There was considerable concern around the table, and there are several members of the Commission that are here. There are members also of the research network that has been created here. So what we hope we could do is both to have an interesting discussion of fragmentation, but look at how this could feed into the work that the Commission is doing. So there will be a follow-up to this. I want to emphasize that the work that we are doing on this Commission has had a considerable degree of involvement from the OECD, and Andy is sitting down to my right. And we are also partners with Chatham House. And that's obviously a wonderful partnership for us. But we really are in many ways in this Commission at the beginning stages. So what I'd like to do to begin, and my intent had been to lead off with Vint for obvious reasons, since he was there at the creation of the first linking of computers online, to get his thoughts about what the risks and the costs of fragmentation are. But we'll hope that he comes in, and if he does, we'll make a turn in the road to go back to pick up his views. But I'm going to ask Laura Denardis, who is the head of the research part of the Commission, which is the critical part, to say a few words. Here is Vint. To say a few words to begin, and we'll let Vint catch his breath. So, all right. So, Laura, give us your view in 5 minutes or so, and we're going to try to keep the intervention short, as to what we're really talking about when we're talking about fragmentation. I mean, how do you see fragmentation? And then, Vint, when you caught your breath, I'm going to ask you the same question.
All right.
So, Laura.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be on this panel with everyone. And a statement such as "I'm concerned about internet fragmentation" really contains a lot of inherent assumptions in it. It starts by assuming that we have a universal internet now. It assumes, to some extent, that fragmentation is one thing with a concrete definition. It can assume that it's something problematic or something concrete. So I think some people would argue that we don't have a universal internet now. I wouldn't argue that, but I understand that because there are different, whether you approach the internet from one language or access speed or particular environment that has different levels of filtering and blocking, or depending on our mediating device, we have a very different experience of the internet. But just putting my engineering hat on, At the level of technical architecture, we have certain things like common protocols, we have a common namespace, we have basic interoperability, we have an end-to-end architectural principle. And these qualities have really created the potential for anyone to access or provision content, or for, regardless of where you are located or the content is located. And these technical features have also provided innovators with an opening to create products and services, or conduct commerce, or citizens to interject ideas. So that, I do think we have the potential for universality at the level of technical architecture now. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that any individual innovator will succeed or speaker will be heard, but the basic design has created this potential. National borders are completely irrelevant to this design, and that's a good thing. The architecture recognizes boundaries between networks rather than borders between countries, and this has also contributed to the universality. Now, on the second question of is fragmentation inherently bad, that of course requires a lot of qualification and a definition of what we mean. What on earth are we talking about here? Now, if you're responsible for network security in some industries, as I know some of you are, you want to design in some fragmentation in certain cases. Some sectors require divisions, but these are instances where a choice is made by the end user, and that's fine. Sometimes fragmentation is also synonymous with the issue of localization. And sometimes even, I would assert that even sometimes localization is positive. If we think about having internet exchange points localized in more countries, that's beneficial for technical efficiency and economic efficiency and access to knowledge, or even content distribution networks. But again, these are things that distribute networks closer to users. They're not things that hold captive data close to users. Other types of localization do hold things captive, like politically motivated requirements for data localization. So these are about content control, and they can have negative effects, which I'm sure we'll talk about on this panel. Now, I just wanted to mention a few other points. One is that other types of fragmentation, I would suggest, have not to do with content as much as with infrastructure design and interoperability. We've had, in my opinion, threats to the universality of the domain name system, especially around efforts to have stronger intellectual property rights enforcement through the DNS. We've had some business models that are based on lack of interoperability, including app-mediated platforms, some types of models online. And I would even suggest that we are starting to have some trends away from open protocols. Now, for someone like me who grew up in the environment of IBM, SNA, and DECnet, and we just couldn't communicate with each other if we worked in different companies. And moving from that to TCP/IP has been a major development in the last 30 years. A lot of people, I have to tell my students about the proprietary online systems of the 1990s. We don't want to go back to that. So I would also suggest that we have to watch out for the protocol. So that's my two cents there, Gordon. To me, it all comes down to a question of economic and expressive liberty. Do we have a choice to connect to anyone we want? Can we access the content that we want within the bounds of law from any device? And can we innovate on top of existing infrastructure? If the answer is yes, we have a degree of universality. If the answer is no, we're moving toward fragmentation.
Thank you very much, Laura. As I mentioned, Vid, before you came in, the Global Commission on Internet Governance, of which you're aware, I know, has chosen the issue of fragmentation as to be the key point of the next meeting of the Commission, which will take place in Seoul in the middle of October. So give us your views. You talked about this issue yesterday morning, I know, in the first session, but give us your thoughts, please.
First of all, thank you. I apologize for being late. It's called running back and forth from the hotel to here. Let me start out by reminding you of something. In the original ARPANET design, our whole purpose was to get everything to connect to everything else. Every computer was supposed to be able to communicate with every other computer. The internet design had the same objective. The theory was that you should be able to send traffic to any termination on the internet. The theory also was that if you didn't want to talk to the other guy, you could throw the traffic away. We made an assumption in the early stages that it was possible for the recipient of traffic that they didn't want to, in fact, receive it and discard it. This implied that there was some ability to authenticate the other party who was communicating with you to decide whether you wanted to speak with it or not. As the network entered into commercial use and enterprises became part of the landscape, they were not necessarily eager to have every single computer in their operation defend itself. And so they came up with the idea of a perimeter defense, the firewall. This is a weak substitute for end-to-end defense, because it's possible to literally walk around the firewall with an infected memory stick or something. But nonetheless, this was adopted as a common practice. It was not part of the original architecture. So we have actually found ourselves needing to defend ourselves against communication that we don't want. And a number of ways have been introduced to do that, filtering being one of them, firewalls being another, end-to-end cryptography, where if the other side doesn't authenticate, then you can refuse to communicate. But fragmentation, for me, starts out being an inability to give myself the option of communicating with anything that I wish to, and the other guy the freedom to say no. Then the question is, are the intervening parties between these two potential communicators delegated the responsibility and authority to filter for you? Now, you might have chosen that your company or your ISP will do some of this filtering for you. Example, you get email service from someone, you don't want the spam, someone else is filtering it for you. If that's your choice, and if you have the choice of who will do that, I still consider that not to be a bad problem. That's not fragmentation in its worst sense. That's a decision that you get to make. So the user got to choose whether or not there was some filtering and some diversion of traffic. The same is true for denial of service attacks. If you don't want to or don't have the capacity to defend yourself and you wish to be protected from denial of service, then you might turn to enterprise, you might turn to an ISP to defend you from that. That's not fragmentation. What is fragmentation, from my point of view, is the denial of your ability to choose whether or not there is intervention in your clear channel access to any other party on the network. It gets more complicated when national means are used without necessarily your agreement to filter and isolate you from sources of traffic or sinks of traffic that you wanted to get to. At this point now, we get, let me call it, a political fragmentation of the network. This, generally speaking, doesn't help people, because if the utility of the network was to assume that if you had an IP address, you should be able to communicate with anyone if they are willing to communicate with you, if that assumption is broken, then all kinds of things don't work that otherwise would work in a very casual way. And as the Internet of Things enters into this architecture, and as it is desirable to be able to talk to these devices either locally or remotely, this arbitrary fragmentation is not going to help. If you have a house full of equipment that you want to manage, and you have the means to validate yourself to your equipment at home, you should be able to communicate. But if there are intervening parties who choose to inhibit your ability to do that, I consider that to be pernicious fragmentation. Last point is that the reasons for intervening and inhibiting communication can range from network management to protect the network resources to purely political motivations to inhibit the ability and freedom of people to communicate with each other. And it's the pernicious kinds of fragmentation that I worry about most.
Thank you very much, Vint. Let me now turn to the other members of the panel, and I'll start on my far right with Andy Wyckoff.
Thank you, Gordon, and I thank all of you for coming here. Actually, you're part of the experiment, I think. A lot of this is evolving very quickly, ill-defined, as Laura suggested. Our interest at the OECD is more of an economic one naturally. We see the internet as a huge source of growth and innovation, and so anything that gets in the way of that working concerns us. I have some sympathy with some who say that maybe fragmentation is inevitable and is the maturing of the internet, and we should be working on adaptation mechanisms. And as Vint just said, some of this is by design, either by policy objective or by user choice. So it's not necessarily bad, but I have a strong interest in having you help me try to frame what is a broad overview of this. So I want to do so because I want to separate kind of the wheat from the chaff, both currently and potentially in the future. What is fundamental here and expensive and would be a real spanner in the works versus what is nice to have and maybe tolerable. And of course, we'd like to quantify it. Now, this seems like an impossible task, but I would argue that it's incredibly important to try to do so for a variety of reasons. One, it provides you with the weights I was just suggesting that you need to figure out what's important and crucial, and the other is provides an evidence base so you can diffuse some of the politics and potentially special interests here. Laura has alluded to some of the various aspects of fragmentation. What comes to my mind is a bit of a matrix. On one dimension, you have these drivers, some of which are public policy objectives, such as sovereignty concerns or economic concerns, or human rights and fundamental values, or preserving local values as subsets of policy concerns. Others are side effects of trying to implement well-intended public policies into code that may fall short. And that's where she was referring to interventions at the infrastructure or logical layer, at the services layer, or even targeting end users, all of which probably aren't perfect. But she also pointed to another concern we have, which is the private sector conduct itself, issues of traffic prioritization, walled gardens, protocols, and we've been rallying for 30 years against monopolies in this area, some of which still exist. I like to map that against users. And to date, most of the economic research I've seen has been looking just at the IT sector itself. That will appeal to many in the room. That makes sense. But to me, that's the small cost, potentially. The bigger costs are on IT using sectors, which are huge now. The whole economy runs on this. I just think about the banking sector, and if we get fragmentation through data localization or other means, I don't know how fraud detection techniques as currently deployed are going to work in that sector, just to raise one example. And I break it down, and I'm almost done, between multinationals, which are inherently using these global networks and will obviously be affected, but what worries me more are the SMEs, who, to some extent, if you fragment this, it may lock in the large incumbents, because the SMEs won't be able to grow and to get the economies of scale that would provide them with the resources to deploy multiple redundancies around the globe, which is what some of this fragmentation would entail. Let me end there.
Thank you very much, Andy. Let me turn next to Bertrand Lachapelle.
Thank you.
You have to turn this.
Sorry. Thank you, Gordon. I'm Bertrand Lachapelle. I'm the director of the Internet and Jurisdiction Project. I want to make a few quick points. The first one is, when you look at the way the Internet was built, as Vint explained, it started with the assumption that it was intended to become a global, unified, or fully interoperable system that was a-territorial, I mean, not based on territorial distinction. This is the reason why most of the governance tools, our institutions and the ecosystem that we have are global institutions or regionalized institutions, but with patterns. If you look, for instance, at Center as a coalition of CCTLDs, it groups CCTLDs that are not only in the European region, they can be somewhere else because they like better to be connected to Center. This architecture was an architecture of decision-making that was on the basis of domain names, addresses, and so on, that were not territorial by principle. When we talk about fragmentation, we seem to tend to forget, because of a short period of illusion, that the reality of the legal environment is a reality of fragmentation. That is the fundamental basis of the international system, is a fragmented legal system. It's called, if I remember correctly, the nation state. And the system of the nation state, which fortunately has many benefits, is the separation of legal system and sovereignties. And the international system is based on non-interference with the affairs of others, which basically is my law in my country and my territory on my geographic criteria, your law in your territory and your geographic criteria. So when we talk about fragmentation, we need to understand that it is the reverse problem than the situation we are on the technical layer. The technical layer has been conceived as global and has to cope with some technicalities like putting cables in certain places or routers in others. But the legal system is the reverse. And the second point I want to make is, when I was speaking about an illusion, I think Laura alluded to that a little bit. There are two words about, or two interpretations about fragmentation that come to mind. The first one is, this is awful because we had this nice unified legal system that was like the technical infrastructure, and when you scratch, the unified structure was on a fundamental principle, which is the law of the country of incorporation of the platforms applies worldwide, which in many cases, the fact is, through the terms of service and other things, was the jurisdiction of the United States for the major platforms, but it could be the jurisdiction of other countries. So we have to be careful that the idealist model that we have in mind of this unified legal environment is actually problematic in some aspects because it produces effects of extraterritorial application of national sovereignties on the basis of the location of the operators. And then you can try to cope and bring other criteria. Oh yeah, but the location of servers matters. Well, not so much. And then you get into trouble. But the symmetry is equally interesting. You have a certain approach to fragmentation that says, this is sad, but fragmentation is the cost of being able to exercise sovereignty. And this is a trend that we've seen relatively recently because of the first element I was mentioning, and because of a certain number of events that happened last year and the revelations of the Snowden and so on. The reaction was a reaffirmation of sovereignty and a desire to re-territorialize in a certain way, and data localization is one dimension of this effort. Those are the two facets, and I think we need to be aware that the two ways of understanding should not be pushed too much. What we want to preserve is the capacity to go from one place to the other. That doesn't mean we should have one single legal framework. And exercising sovereignty in shared online spaces does not mean and should not mean re-establishing very precise borders, because in many cases, the rules and the responsibilities overlap because the spaces are shared. So the next point quickly is, when you have the reaction by, and some of you know that I used to be the French representative, or the representative in the French Foreign Affairs Ministry. So I've seen this problem from the other side in a certain way than the one I see it now. Exercising sovereignty is legitimate. There is no capacity for government to have any role internationally without exercising sovereignty. The problem is that with the internet, the exercise of your sovereignty, if you're not careful, has an impact on other countries. And this is contrary to the principle of sovereignty. This is why the Council of Europe in 2011, thanks to the work that was done by a small group of people that I participated in, has adopted 2 recommendations of its Council of Ministers regarding, in particular, the principle of non-transboundary harm due to national decisions. A state, in the exercise of its sovereignty, has the responsibility to not have a transboundary impact that would be harmful either for the infrastructure or for the citizens of another country. And this restraint is not natural. The natural behavior of sovereignty is not to be restrained, except by wars and conflicts. And so we have the challenge today in civil society, in business, and in governments to understand how the exercise of sovereignty can be legitimate and respectful in an environment where shared responsibilities occur. And here we are confronted with a problem, which is the law of unintended consequences. There are many situations where a very simple, apparently rational decision at the individual level looks perfectly legitimate, and the cumulative effect of all these decisions is not scalable and is actually harmful for what we want to protect. And I think it can be a sort of segue to the discussion on data localization, where the rules that apply to access to data can be either scalable positively or non-scalable positively in that regard. But I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bertrand. That's very useful, and I hope will provoke you in this room and those of you who are listening online to pose some questions or to make some observations. But we have one more short presentation from the panel, and that's from Sunil Abraham. So, Sunil.
Thank you. I'll start by examining some of the reasons why there is a renewed interest in fragmentation on the part of the state. And as you said, the state is now back in internet governance. The first imperative is wanting to exert jurisdiction. Often private actors say, your jurisdiction does not apply, and therefore we will not abide by your law. And the state wants to apply jurisdiction. Second, as in the European Union, some of the fragmentation proposals are supposedly to protect human rights, to protect the privacy of European citizens. The third imperative is taxation. Most of these internet giants are experts at tax minimization, and nation states want to extract tax from these organizations. And according to national tax law, if transactions happen within the jurisdiction, then they're legitimately taxed. The next one is efficiency, and the final one is preferential market access. So what I'm going to do is take some of the most horrible suggestions that states make and try and redeem them and see if we can examine them in more positive light. And I feel if we can address the concerns that states have through technically sound proposals, then they won't hopefully make mistakes. So the first horrible idea is the national internet idea. If we were to make it clear to governments that really what you want to protect is military communication and other state communication that deeply implicates national security, then perhaps you should consider a proposal by Gaurav Raj Upadhyay, which says that whenever cable is laid, and since carrying capacity of fiber has increased dramatically because of the improvements in termination devices, maybe some fiber should be allocated or given to the government. So the government on the existing network will have a network that is completely distinct at the physical layer, and they can use that for all the sensitive communications that don't necessarily have to reach the internet. The second thing is looking at preferential market access. So we've heard stories of the US government banning the purchase of ZTE and Huawei equipment for government agencies. At one point, the US government actually advised the telcos that you shouldn't be buying equipment from both these Chinese manufacturers, but that proposal didn't go through. Australia, leaked documents tell us that Australia has banned Huawei equipment from being involved in the build-out of the national broadband network. And in some senses, to go to the Indian government and say, don't fragment the internet, you will pay a huge price in terms of GDP, sounds a bit flawed no matter what numbers you throw to them, because the Chinese government has, in a sense, fragmented the internet, and there is no perceivable difference to their GDP. They seem to be doing much better than we're doing. So we go back to the promise made at WIPO to the developing countries. Sign all these maximalist IP treaties, and we as developed countries will engage in technology transfer. And there is enough literature published which tells us there has hardly been any technology transfer. So threats of fragmentation proposals help with kind of evening the playing field between international players and domestic actors. Threats of fragmentation, even as pure rhetoric, help convince large corporations that they should comply with domestic law, etc. Finally, if we use the argument that various types of censorship is a form of fragmentation, then the Indian government will say the US government has already been fragmenting the internet because of their maximalist position on IP. Access to knowledge, in their view, is a precondition to free speech. And if the US government can fragment the government based on intellectual property, then why can't we fragment the internet using repression of political speech or other types of speech? So I'll stop there because I don't want to take too long, but surely legitimate concerns of government can be addressed by people that know how the technology works, by providing solutions that won't necessarily break internet protocols, etc., but address their concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunil. I hope that has provoked you in the room and those of you who are online to make some observations and responses to the points that have been made.
I'm levitating.
You're levitating? Well, then you levitate into the microphone.
No. I didn't mean to interrupt the rest of your speech. I just wanted to let you know I'm levitating. Thank you. No, I do have a few. I have,
all right, well, why don't
some
you go ahead.
So, look, first of all, please remember that the network is designed and presently operates in a layered way. And so basic connectivity lies at a very low layer, the internet protocol layer. And a lot of the interventions that take place actually occur above that level. And one of the most dangerous forms of fragmentation is to mistakenly intervene at the wrong layer in the architecture to prevent all communication as opposed to trying to inhibit some kind of communication. And that's the intellectual property question. The issue is not blocking the communication channel, it's doing something about access to content that you believe other parties have to show bona fides to get to. The other point I want to make about jurisdiction is that one of the dangers of all of this is that to assert jurisdictional rights and then to extend them in an extraterritorial way is very tempting, and it often happens, and this is also not entirely acceptable.
Very calmly put. Comments around the table? I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourselves, which I did very quickly at the beginning of this session. Who would? Pinder. Oh, you're pointing. Okay. Yeah. Please speak up into the microphone.
I thought you are number one. No, okay. Thank you. My name is Ashwin from Indonesia. I think it's very interesting, Mr. Finser's description about the basic philosophy of the internet, at least in the beginning. We can say, I don't want this letter, I don't want this email, I don't want this whatever. I can decide what I want. And even the government can decide what the government wants in their jurisdiction. Unfortunately, that's not the case today. Now, bearing in mind the development of the internet cases, and if we look at the our previous history, our previous experience about the GPS system, when the US built their GPS navigation system, it's very useful. It's for global. Everybody can use it. But then not all group like that. For the sake of security, for the sake of many things, they do not want to use the GPS. So the Europe set up the Galileo. The Chinese, first they joined the Galileo, but then they set up their own Beidou navigation system. The Russians set up the GLONASS, and so on and so on. So, in the GPS navigation system, the global navigation system, it has been fragmented because we cannot get an internationalization of navigation system. We don't have multi-stakeholders organization for looking after and operating navigation system. Now, just want to get Mr. Finser's comment. If we cannot do that for navigation system, for the benefit of the whole people in the world, how can we do that in the globalization of internet system? Thank you.
Bertrand, go ahead and ask.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear correctly. You were talking about what system when you said if we cannot do it for this system. I could not hear exactly what. Can you please repeat?
GPS, global positioning system.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard, but I was not sure. Okay.
I've seen a hand down here. Yes, please.
Bill Woodcock, not to be disputatious, and I understand the overall point you're making, but I would argue that in that example, this is a beneficial redundancy of the kind that Laura was referring to with exchange points, for instance. We now have 4 systems which are under different control, all of them available to everyone in the world, and you can get a single chip which is a receiver for all 4 systems and compares the results of them. So if one of the 4 operators decides to falsify the results, as the US government, for instance, has made clear is their policy position to reserve the right to do, you have 3 checks against that, 3 other things that will let you know that that has gone wrong. So I think we need to be really careful about this notion that all divergences, all changes are fragmentation and are bad, right? I mean, this is something that both Iran and Brazil have been criticized for when they follow the same path that, for instance, the United States and Western Europe have in building out more internet infrastructure. When, we congratulate ourselves for doing it, but criticize someone else for doing it, that doesn't seem like fragmentation to me. But to be clear, there are many other things that are fragmentation and are bad.
Yes, I've seen a hand down there. Yes, please.
I am Ivan Mendes, an ambassador from ISOC. I have a short question to Vincerf. Who wins with the fragmentation of the internet? What's in it for the one who promotes it?
Could you repeat that question? It wasn't really audible.
Yeah, the question was who wins from the internet fragmentation?
Wins. Wins, no?
Yeah.
Who wins?
Yeah, who wins? I mean, there is a fragmentation happening, but who is going to win? Who is winning in this fragmentation?
Thank you. Okay. I thought you said Google is the winner if it's fragmented. They said, no, we're not,
Everybody.
Okay, so the answer to this question is that parties who do not wish to permit freedom of expression and access to information and sharing of information, those parties win if they succeed in fragmenting the internet in the pernicious way that I mentioned and others have mentioned. And that's not a win for any of us. There are parties, of course, who win by preventing people from communicating with each other. That's not a value in my system.
Please, Bertrand.
Just one point there. What I was saying regarding the model of international arrangements that we have, without being pedantic, it dates back to a situation of huge wars. The 30 Years' War in Europe were intense bloodshed, and it was solved by this principle of separation, say my territory, your territory, and no overlap. We are now in an environment where this notion, which organizes the physical world pretty well, is in conflict with the way people interact naturally in the internet. And so we have two choices that seem to appear as the logical outcome, and none of them are appropriate. One is the complete harmonization at all levels to have the global space, and if we cannot achieve that, the only other solution is to reintroduce separation. I believe that's not the, I mean, it's personal, but I don't believe that's not the way you should ask the question. The real question is, how do we manage the rules for coexistence? We have to find the rules for coexistence, and it's not easy. And as was said before, there was a period where the notion that because a platform was located somewhere, the local laws in another country did not apply, these days are over. They were over back in 1995 with the Yahoo case first. Then we got geo-IP filtering rules that began to spread everywhere as a solution. Whether it's good or not is another debate. But then the notion that local laws do apply to a certain extent, especially in speech-related issues, is now accepted. How it is implemented and to what extent is a completely different problem than how do we repartition. So I think the reason why, and I liked Sunil's comment that sometimes the fear of something is triggering a good reaction. It is true that the fear that the unilateral actions towards something that might be fragmenting is sufficiently worrisome to force people to find the rules of coexistence. But I think that's the right way to ask rather than saying we need to restructure on a territorial basis.
Thank you, Bertrand. Before I go to Andy and Sunil, who want to comment on this, let me just ask Carolyn and Samantha whether there's anybody online looking to ask a question.
We have one question, and the question is coming from Casper Bowden, and he's asking, why don't countries sign a new treaty for equal privacy rights and route around US, Five Eyes, and anyone else who won't?
Okay, thank you. Let me now go to the two I mentioned. So Andy, you can reply to that if you want. And
I'd rather come back to will Google be the big winner? And but it's not so much about Google. What I worry about is we really ruin the global network economies here. And it's not so much about Google. It's about the next Google, particularly if it comes from more of an emerging economy. Is going to face. Is just not going to be able to scale with the same efficiency that Google was able to scale if these barriers are in place. And to me, it's that the unborn that I worry about.
Thank you. Let me go next to Sunil and then the gentleman in the blue shirt.
I just want to examine another proposal by the Indian government. This is by the National Security Council, and the proposal is mandatory domestic routing of domestic traffic. If we just removed the word mandatory and we just said domestic routing of domestic traffic, that doesn't sound that bad. And there are two possible ways you can do this, and Rudolf Vandenberg pointed out to the difference. One is you can start tampering with routing tables and change the way the internet protocols work. And the other is throw money at the problem and put more fiber into the ground and have more active internet exchanges. Both measures roughly accomplish the same goal. Where I'd like to disagree with Vint is that the authoritarian government really doesn't benefit. Rohan Samarajiva says that there is a King Gyanendra law. Wherever dictators have tried to censor the internet and do whole-scale censorship of the internet, they have usually fallen. Those governments have usually fallen after that. And King Gyanendra is the example from Nepal. There's, of course, a Tansen exception, which describes the Myanmar situation. But I can't imagine that for an authoritarian government, heavy control and censorship of the internet will actually serve their purpose in the long run. Thank you.
Yes, I wonder sometimes how long the long run is, but maybe that's too pessimistic. Gentleman in the blue shirt, did you ask? Oh, I thought you asked to come.
No, but this gentleman over here did.
Okay,
Yeah,
I missed then.
He has a blue shirt.
Also, I see that.
Hi everyone, my name is Ankush and I am the ISOC ambassador from India. So in the panel we talked about internet fragmentation. It's growing day by day. Technology is one of the solutions that can help. But what does the panel think? Where are we going from here now? Are we thinking that technology is the only thing that can help solve this problem? Or there has to be some bodies like IGF, which can help resolve at a global level, involving the local governments also. What does the panel think on this?
Anybody want to have a crack at that question? Pardon? Okay, please.
I'd like to push back a little bit on a meme in the room right now about this idea that governments didn't have sovereignty and now they suddenly do. Because I don't think that's right. They've had sovereignty, they've had jurisdiction. I think about the things that have always already been located within borders. The telecom infrastructures, the IXPs, equipment companies, registries, all of these things completely subject to law. And then even companies who are in another country are subject to the laws in which they do business. So this idea that there was not sovereignty and that there suddenly is not quite right. I also wonder why I often receive arguments from other people that governments stepping in are the solution to so many of the problems that exist right now. Because if you just look at the last 5 years, governments, I'll just be a little bit provocative intentionally, don't really have a great track record when it comes to the internet. We have governments cutting off access. We have many governments engaging in surveillance. We have governments engaging in filtering and censoring. So in coming directly to the question, I think that a balance of powers is a much better solution than turning to this issue of jurisdiction and government solutions. Just one more point to heap onto what you said. These are very technically complex systems. We have systems that have hundreds of billions of transactions a day. And moving from an environment where the decisions are based on technical expediency to politically driven decisions, I think can have unintended consequences, and I don't think we should take for granted the stability that we've had thus far.
Thank you, Laura. Bertrand?
First of all, I wanted to go back to what Laura said at the very beginning. What I liked about her presentation is an attempt, for once, which is not that frequent in our discussions in general, to introduce nuance. The word fragmentation is extremely loaded, just like was balkanization and so on. And whenever I see, and I owe that to Art Riley, who used to work at Cisco, in one of the first IGFs, I had a workshop, and he used, it was in Rio, he used a word that says, you need to be careful, people need to have the same vernacular, i.e. you need to make sure that they put the same thing behind the same words, because otherwise there's no way they're going to find a solution to the problem. And so the exercise that we're trying to do here is, behind the word fragmentation, there are many representations, and sometimes very visceral representations. I can give you a very concrete example. I come from France. I worked in the French government in the past. In the military doctrine of the French government, the notion of sanctuarization is an extremely strong word. The dissuasion, the nuclear power is about making a sanctuary of the territory. And when I talk with French people, and including in the military sector, and we talk about fragmentation and balkanization, it does have a bad meaning, but not only a bad meaning, because it also evokes these other words of we are protected. And we have to be very careful, because when we talk about that, what is a bad thing for one may feel also as a positive thing for others. So the good thing about this discussion is that it tries to single out different elements. The portion that I deal with on a daily basis on the issues of jurisdiction are different from the issues that people deal at the technical layer, or the ones who multiply, as Bill was mentioning, IXPs and so on. So we need to understand that when we address this thing, and this is an answer to your question, where do we move from there? The first thing, if we could move forward on several tracks rather than on a single track regarding fragmentation, that would be wonderful. What Andy was saying regarding startups, the unborn, is absolutely true, without pushing the reasoning too far. If you launch a startup today, you do have to take into account a much bigger diversity of laws than you had in the past. And Laura, you were right. The laws were always there. But let's be frank, a lot of companies in the early days could get away with answering, we're based in this country, so it's our country law that applies, and not yours. And it took some pressure, and it took some deliberation to try to find a balance, and we are beginning to find a balance. So finding the different tracks, and I think the Commission and the network has among its benefits to potentially identify those tracks, but moving forward needs to identify where basically harmonization is not possible, but interoperability is possible, where some structuring of cyberspace is useful also on a legal basis, where it should not be promoted, etc. Introducing nuance is one of the biggest benefits that the IGF could and the Commission could bring.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. Other comments or questions, including online? Yep, there's one down in the back of the room and one to my right. Please.
Thank you. My name is Sergio Alves. I'm Brazilian. I come from the telecom regulator, but I'm here with ISAC, the IGF. I wanted to address a question to someone from the US, maybe to Mr. Vincerf or to Laura. There are some services, we usually look into international cases, and there is, Brazil has been one of the cases, ITU has been one of the cases on fragmentation, and this word that Mr. Bertrand brought on balkanization. In the US, I have looked into the history of this word in the United States, and it was firstly used in 1918, and since 1940 it has been used by the US Supreme Court to explain, to address some of the issues of the Interstate Commerce Clause, which basically allows some states to have different jurisdictions within the United States itself. And I would like, and then it has brought some issues to startups and to internet companies there. We have seen Lyft, Uber, Landing Club, several, even Tesla, which with some legislations being proposed, for example, in North Carolina, that would not allow Tesla cars to be sold online. I would like to see how you address, how you foresee this issue of being handled in the United States itself. Some of the companies are allowed to operate in one state, and they're not allowed to operate in others. It's different from the architectural level that we have touched, but at the service level, it's pretty important to understand how this comes up in the United States as well. Thank you.
Why don't I combine two questions here, and then I'm going to ask the panel to reply to yours, but then I'll bring in other panelists, and we'll aim to wrap up in about 5 minutes. The person on the far right side here that indicated they wanted to speak. Oh, I thought there was one down there. Please, then you go ahead.
No, there was one.
I was sure there was one down there. No?
Well, doesn't look like it.
Gone away.
On the left.
This lady here, please, yes.
Hi, Audrey Flunk with Intel. Sorry, Bertrand mostly addressed what I was hoping somebody would bring up, which seemed like there was a bit of a disconnect between political fragmentation and policies around what equipment can cross borders and who wants to buy what from whom versus sort of technical fragmentation in terms of whether the infrastructure will interoperate. And so I was going to see if the panelists would react to those separations, but Bertrand sort of already did, so I don't want to divert attention from other topics.
Thank you. And there was much nodding of heads to my right, I saw with your comment. Anybody else? Yes, this gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Igor Milashevsky. I'm from Russia, from Ministry of Telecom. I really appreciate Mr. Vincerf's explanation what is fragmentation and what is not. But I have an example in mind which was not covered. I always thought that Internet was invented to interconnect the networks, and I think today we have the similar situation. Probably some applications could be considered as networks, like social networks, like Skype, FaceTime. It's applications with their own stake of protocols over the internet, which they use to interconnect as an interconnection base. Some of these applications are localized within states' borders, like e-government. Is it fragmentation or not? I think not. I think we need the elaborated definition of what is the fragmentation. I don't know what is it, but what is the reasons for real fragmentation? It is, I suspect, it is the lack of transparency in the administration of critical resources of internet, and lack of lawful regulation, and lack of security, of business continuity abilities. So my proposal is to think about putting into the definition your wise explanation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have, at least I find up here, I have no idea what's going on up there, but it's producing an enormous amount of noise, which doesn't make hearing up here any easier. What I'll do then now is just giving them each a minute, if I may, ask the panelists to reply to such questions as they wish to reply to, and make any last comments. And I'll start on my left with you, Sunil.
I'll pass. I don't have any concluding comments. Thank you.
Do not frown. Oh, we're not playing bridge. I'm sorry.
I'm a professor, so I always have other comments all the time. I'd like to react to this statement about separating the policy layer from the technical layer, because you can't separate the policy layer from the technical layer. It's not that we shouldn't, it's that we can't, because technical design can be a form of public policy. We don't have to look any further than accessibility standards for the disabled. There are good ways and bad ways. And also, the basic thesis of my work is that arrangements of technical architecture are also arrangements of power at the same time. That's why it's so important to look at this intersection of what governments are saying that we should do about infrastructure and what we actually do. And the converse of that is also true, that decision making at the policy layer can very much affect infrastructure. So I think we have to look at those as being a little bit more connected than we would want them to be.
Yeah, I see this gentleman here in the t-shirt or the green, I'm not sure it's green or yellow with my eyes, but anyway, it's bright. If I could just ask you to be brief because we're going to otherwise run out of time. Thank you.
I'm very brief. Dmitry Kokhmanyuk, UACC TLD. Well, just commenting on the technical and policy. Well, there is actually, we do have a problem with the top-level domain of UA subdomains not operating in Crimea and some ISPs in Crimea not being able to operate due to basically some fiscal and political issues. So policy does affect technology and critical resources, and I have witnessed that right now. I don't want to go into detail, but you cannot separate these issues, and like the gentleman said, they do impact. It's like if you cannot make a payment for services, you cannot connect to the host country, so you have to. So it's like Crimean ISPs are forced to send traffic to Russian ISPs because they have no other choice. Not because the wires aren't there, but because the money cannot be sent. You know, and likewise with domain names. That's pretty much all my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Vin, I'm going to save you for the end. Okay. So Bertrand and then Andy.
The idea of the definition is what I was alluding to with identification of the different dimensions. I think it's more important than trying to find a definition, but sorting the different dimensions. I want to open the debate on the separation of policy and technical. It's not, I think that it's not because there are overlaps that the two cannot be considered as separate entities, but that's a discussion that we've been having with Laura for a while. To quote Baroness Ritchie, with whom I was discussing yesterday, was the chair of Nominet, she was saying that when those things overlap, it's a little bit like when you do cream from milk. You activate the milk, and then at one point it becomes cream, but you don't know when one has gone into the other. Still, there's something called milk and something called cream. So there's something called policy, there's something called technical, and in between there are technical impacts of the policy and policy impacts of the technical, which is what the Net Mondial said. And finally, I fully agree that actually there are different dimensions. For those of you who may have noticed it, this is the second in a workshop in a track of 3 workshops regarding fragmentation. There was one on Tuesday on the technical dimension led by ISOC. This one has covered, among other things, some of the economic dimension and the costs by CG. And as the Internet and Jurisdiction Project, we have a third one tomorrow at 2:30 in room 2 on the legal dimension of jurisdiction and so on, and you're of course cordially invited to attend.
Thank you, Bertrand. Andy?
Thank you, Gordon. I guess I'm taken by the unintended, unexpected effects of there, and I think the way it was intended was just, you do one thing here and 3 other things happen that you really didn't know about, and it's what Bertrand's talking about, the interaction of the technical with the regulatory. But I also worry about the unintended effect of creating maybe a political economy where you go in for one objective, which sounds okay on the surface, but then it creates an environment that's ripe for other mischievous behavior, and you end up with this slippery slope where things get worse and worse. And helping to sort that out would be I again welcome the expertise in the room for thinking that whether that's a real concern or maybe something that I don't have to worry about.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. Vint, you get the last word.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to keep this short. First of all, there are some kinds of fragmentation that you can't help and you need to overcome, and technology will help. One of them, in radio world, for example, you get into radio shadow, other kinds of impairments occur, and there isn't any communication. There are protocols that recover from that kind of fragmentation, and that's a good thing. I think that the problem we run into is this policy and technical interaction. There are some kinds of fragmentation that are abused. The ways of achieving them are abusive. For example, domain seizure to shut down everything at a particular website is a clumsy way of dealing with a much more refined problem. The technologists may actually have to help the policy guys find less disruptive and less blunt ways to achieve a legitimate objective. On the other side, there are times when fragmentation is intended to prevent what would otherwise be thought legitimate communication. This is the John Gilmore case. John described that the internet interprets censorship as essentially damage, and it routes around it. And what you find is when people object to being prevented from communicating, they find technologies to get around that censorship and around that intervention. And we see that all the time, virtual private networks, end-to-end cryptography, and a bunch of other things. It's a missile, anti-missile kind of scenario, and it's going to stay that way for as long as I can imagine.
Well, thank you very much, Vint, and thank you, all the panelists. I would ask you all to give them a hand of applause. I think we've had an interesting discussion. I know we could have gone on for longer. Anyway, thank you all.
That's right. Thank you.
That's for you.
This is great. It's great.